is Rachel Green, and I've lived in Needham basically my whole life. When I recently became interested in racial justice, I wanted to see how I could work locally to bring more inclusivity and diversity into my town. And I found that EJN was a great opportunity to do just that with people in my own community. Having more housing choice and expanding the housing market here is a vital way to do that and to be more welcoming to BIPOC in general in the town. I've especially enjoyed my research looking into the historical aspects of how we got to such a exclusive situation here in Needham and seeing just how difficult it is to work towards progress. And I think that EJN is doing that in a very collective way that's really rewarding to be a part of. And in terms of getting more housing choice in Needham, ADUs is a great place to start.
Hello, and welcome to Moving Forward Together with Equal Justice in Needham. I am the show host, Gretchen Cook-Anderson. Today, we look at the benefits of an inclusive zoning policy around accessory dwelling units, otherwise known as ADUs. They are small one-bedroom apartments that are either built into a single-family home or detached on the property, often in a converted garage. These small rental properties can provide a fast, inconspicuous increase in affordable housing in a town that has large portions of its land zoned for only single-family homes. Here in Needham, where housing prices have skyrocketed in recent years and over 90% of the land is zoned for single-family homes, the need for rental apartments is huge. ADUs could be rented by young couples, employees of local businesses, nannies, or seniors looking to stay in the community. The rental income could help senior homeowners stay in their homes as well, if they could build out an ADU. To learn what Needham's ADU policies are now, we spoke to Jeanne McKnight, former chair and current member of the Needham Planning Board. She explained that Needham passed its first ADU zoning at a special town meeting in the fall of 2019, encouraged by the health department to benefit seniors.
What the bylaw says right now is, well, first of all, it spells out what the intent is, and it's to permit accessory dwelling units in single-family homes. For occupancy, the unit could be occupied either by the owner of the single-family home, or a family member of the owner, or a caretaker, a caregiver to the owner, or to a family member of the owner who lives with the owner. No nannies. It's to ensure that the single family character of the neighborhood will be maintained and that the accessory dwelling unit remains subordinate to the principal use of the living quarters. In other words, it looks like a single family home. What's special about the accessory dwelling unit? Well, it's a complete separate housekeeping unit containing provisions for living, sleeping, and most importantly, cooking. It's the kitchen that really makes the accessory dwelling unit, and all three of those things combined in one unit. Now, we have a couple of important restrictions I want to mention. First of all, you can't have an accessory dwelling unit at all without a special permit from Needham's Zoning Board of Appeals, which involves the filing of an application showing that you comply and the plans for your unit comply in every respect with the bylaw. And then there's a hearing before the Zoning Board of Appeals and then the grant of a special permit. And there can't be more than one ADU on a lot, and it has to be inside the dwelling unit. You could put on an addition for the ADU, or you could construct it within the existing building, but you can't put it in a garage or barn or construct an outbuilding for it. And the size of the ADU is limited to 850 square feet, and it can't have more than one bedroom. One issue is we're not allowing elderly homeowners to simply rent out the unit to anyone for the sake of getting some rent to help them with their expenses of home ownership, their taxes, their utilities. A lot of other towns do allow this.
We are fortunate to have a very knowledgeable panel today to discuss how Needham and other towns are dealing with the need for affordable housing and ADUs in particular. Amy Dain is a public policy researcher who wrote a comprehensive report comparing Massachusetts ADU zoning policies in 2018. Deb Crossley is a Newton City Councilor who is an advocate for affordable housing and very knowledgeable about Newton's policy and its effect in the city. And Oscar Mertz, participant of Equal Justice in Needham, who supports increasing the housing choices available in the town. And then lastly, but definitely not least, Daphne Collins is the administrative specialist for Needham's Zoning Board of Appeals. Let's start with Daphne. Daphne, who calls your office about building an ADU in their home?
Okay, well, we get about two calls a month ever since the town adopted the ADU, and that was in April of 2020. So I get about two calls, and what they are people who are looking to. It's mostly parents. It's mostly, I would say, mostly relatives, a parent or a child that they're looking for. I find it when I say, really, I know you've been talking about affordability, but because of the narrow nature of the ADUs here in Needham, it turns out to be, it has to be either a caretaker or a relative. Intergenerational families who are wanting to have their parent live with them. The cases that we have received since last year are very heartwarming. It's about love. It's really not about finances. In this case, it's about caring for your loved one. And so it's been very gratifying. I think one of the cases was a mother was taking care of her disabled veteran son. She passed away, and her daughter went ahead and made an addition to house her brother. So those are the kinds of stories we're seeing in this very early batch, which has, that has come about. So it's need, it's love, and that's what I've been seeing.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, Daphne. So how many special permits have been given so far?
8 cases. Okay. And, but I see during that same period, I had 29 special permits. So we're now seeing about, in the special permit request world, I'm seeing about, 27% of my caseload is ADU requests. It's just been very steady. As soon as it was adopted, as soon as it passed the Attorney General's office, just a very steady caseload of people who are looking to create a unit for their relative.
Very nice. Thank you, Daphne. Well, I don't know. After this show, you might see more. Who knows?
We're ready. We're absolutely
wonderful. This is a great way to inform the community about what's possible out there.
Yes.
So thank you very much, Daphne. And then I want to turn to Amy, if we can. Amy, can you please describe your research on ADUs and why it's such a hot topic right now?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the research. I've actually done 2 studies on local zoning for ADUs in Eastern Massachusetts. The first one I did in 2004, and the second one I conducted in 2017 to 2018. So going back to 2004, I was just out of grad school, and housing prices in the region were escalating, and there was this sense that we had a housing shortage, and people were bidding up the price of a limited supply of housing across Greater Boston. And the reason for the housing shortage was understood at the time, and now too, to be due to cities and towns over restricting housing production relative to demand for housing, and doing this through largely through regulation of housing. So I did the study to look at a huge range of regulatory barriers to housing development. And I did a survey of 187 cities and towns in Eastern Massachusetts, all the towns in 50 miles of Boston. And I looked at 100 different questions about their zoning and other regulations. One of the things I looked at was ADU policy. And I found out of 187 cities and towns, 107 of them had provisions in their zoning to allow for homeowners to add ADUs. But I found that out of the 107 that allowed it, only 50 would allow the homeowner to rent out those units, and the rest had to only relatives of the homeowner or caretakers could live in those units. And I found also that they were highly restrictive in what they allowed, and the regulations varied a lot. But they were often saying you could only put in an ADU if you have like 1 acre of land under your house, or you can only add an ADU if your house is larger than 2,000 square feet, or in Weston 3,000 square feet. And they'd say you need to have like 2 extra off-street parking spaces, and you need to go through the special permit process. There were a lot of restrictions. I also found in that original study, I read the local master plans and found in plan after plan recommendations saying allow accessory dwelling units and let people rent them out. And that was back in 2004. So a lot of those plans were written in the 90s. And this is a long-term sort of effort by planners and pro-housing advocates to get more housing allowed across the region. So that was really interesting to me as sort of like a hot topic back in 2004. I looked at it again in 2017. That time I surveyed 100 cities and towns of Greater Boston. And I did find that about a quarter of the cities and towns I'd surveyed had revised their zoning for ADUs since the first study. But I found then out of 100 that there were 68 that allowed ADUs, but only 37 out of the 100 allowed people to put them in an ADU and rent it out. And they were still like very highly restrictive. And I surveyed building inspectors and planners to find out sort of how many dwelling units were being allowed. And in a lot of cities and towns, it was like 1, 2, or 3 per year. There were a few places more progressive like Newton, and I'm really interested to hear Deb Crossley talk about Newton's experience. It's a little bit more progressive, a recent revision, and Lexington more progressive, but got slightly higher numbers. But there's no place that was like getting hundreds of ADUs, or that whole neighborhoods were turning over from single family houses to like lots and lots of housing. But I would ideally like to see us up the numbers sort of across the region, because this is a great source of housing. Doesn't require new sewer systems to be put in, new infrastructure. It's sort of a very incremental, low-hanging fruit, easy way to get more housing in the suburbs. So I'd love to see sort of the pace of reform here pick up after years of advocacy, that we still have these issues of housing shortage and a need for rental housing.
Interesting. Thank you, Amy. When you consider some of the restrictiveness around the use of ADUs and whether they can be rental properties or not, what do you think the answer is to some of the restrictiveness that you found in doing the surveying of the local communities?
Well, the restrictions are like multiple and varied. I would love to see cities and towns reform, first of all, to allow for these units to be rented out.
Very nice. Thank you, Amy. That gives us a lot of food for thought. Thank you very much. So let's turn to Newton, shall we? Let's turn to this town that Amy was kind of really showing us a spotlight on, to try to find out what's been going on in Newton when it comes to ADUs. So Deb, what are Newton's policies now, and why were they changed in 2017?
Newton has had an accessory apartment ordinance for decades, 35 years before we passed the far more progressive ordinance. many of us tried to pick away at that over that time frame, and made very incremental progress until we decided we needed to upgrade our entire city ordinances, clean them up, make them more readable. And a group of us formed a regular working group, including one of the counselors who's very much opposed to expanding the opportunity. But it was sort of 5-1 in that group. And we had a member of the planning department, James Frias, who's now the director of the Natick planning department, who did some fabulous research and modeled a draft on the Portland, Oregon ordinance, in case anyone's interested in looking that up. So we used to have all the restrictions that Amy just mentioned, minimum house size, minimum lot size, required parking, owner occupancy only in the main house. Some of those things we chipped away at, but it wasn't until December of 2017 that we passed the new ordinance. So now, although we had a by right option, previously, it was so strictly regulated that we got few takers. We even tried to spice it up by adding money from the Community Preservation Fund if people would deed restrict them as affordable units. So we have never had a residency restriction, however. We're not sure that's actually legal, but but it's I know it's done all over the place. But what we do have, and what satisfied folks who were concerned about that, is, and again, I'm not sure that this is going to survive over the time, many years, but most cities and towns have a limitation on the number of people unrelated by blood or marriage, which may occupy a dwelling, unless you're a group home, but a single family or 2-family home. That doesn't change when you add an accessory unit. And we made that point with the city council, which, gave people some comfort about, well, we're not just going to, load up the house with a whole nother. And by the way, we allow them in single family homes and 2-family homes, but only 1 per lot. So we've jumped from creating about 44 units up through 2017 to creating 54 units in the last 3 years, from 2018, 2019, 2020. And there's probably more this year, but things are getting off to a bit of a slow start after the pandemic. And that's a good indication of the need, because it's not only family members, although I would say most of it is family members or caretakers, nannies, and so forth. But we've had a number of people I know over years serving on the land use committee come in and seek special permits because they're a single mom and they want to keep their kids in the Newton public schools, and they can't because for whatever reason they're now single, they can't carry the freight, right? All the cost of living goes up. And so they do need the rental unit. And some people choose, as we do now, also allow the owner to live in either unit. So if you are living alone now in your later years, perhaps, you can decide to live in the accessory unit and rent the rest of the house to a family. We also don't limit the number of bedrooms. We do limit the absolute size. You can have a bigger size by special permit. And I hope that we're going to continue to improve on the ordinance to allow detached accessory units by right, as opposed to having to go through the special permit process, which is quite onerous for a lot of people. Oh yeah, the other thing we had to do to give people comfort was to clearly separate it from short-term rentals. We do allow short-term rentals. We have another ordinance that regulates that, but we only allow a minimum of 30-day rentals in the accessory units. And there's also compliance requirements. It runs with the land, but if you sell your home, the You have to notify inspectional services, and they have to do a compliance check on the new owner, make sure everything's still the way it's supposed to be, and that the new owner understands how the accessory unit may be used. And annually, the owner has to submit an affidavit, basically, updating the status of the accessory unit if they're choosing to keep it. So I think that's about it. We're very pleased. We were in our working group for a couple of years, from 2015 to 2017, before we were able to come to a reasonable consensus on this.
So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. For folks who want to get into the weeds, it's section 6.7 of our zoning code, which it sounds like Amy Dain knows this and probably could have given my talk.
And for the weeds in Needham, it's 3.15.
3
section of the bylaw.
Thank you, Daphne, and thank you, Deb. So I think we're going to turn to Oscar Mertz. Oscar, what would a more effective ADU policy in Needham look like to you? And then how would it benefit Needham in your view?
Thank you for the question. Thank you, everyone. This is hugely informative, and I'm getting up to speed on all of the technicalities and the history myself. And I know Needham is very early in the game, so I know there's probably reasons for them to be a little reluctant to change again, since this just happened, and Daphne's obviously on a mission to make this more understandable to everybody, and this show will help too. So I think what it would ideally look like is what everybody's been talking about. Let's try and lessen the restriction on who can do this. ADUs are vital because they're small, and they are ideally that by their nature of their being small, they're affordable. So, and I started just after I got married. I lived in a 2-unit, 2-room carriage house. I mean, everybody needs an opportunity to find something that's affordable where you want to live. So the need for small units to be available to a broader number of people is definitely a driving force for just taking advantage of this one opportunity for increasing housing choice. And I think a lot can be said to people who are concerned about density, is that there's a small number of units that are likely going to ever be built as ADUs, and it's also spread out over the entire town. So you're not looking at concentrations where ADUs are going to occur. They're going to occur across the entire single family area of Needham and every other town. So the chances of having somebody feel like their neighborhood is transforming, I would say a tear down in a huge McMansion is more of a transformation of a neighborhood than having somebody live over the garage, right? Or live in a unit that's already in a house. So I think they're pretty modest. I think they're very valuable with fewer restrictions. And I think it would be something worth considering because it's one of those unique sizes of unit that is very affordable by its definition. And it's integrated in the neighborhood, so people won't feel like it's a large transformation.
Thank you so much, Oscar. And it's interesting. I was just reflecting back myself on, gosh, this would have been over 21 years ago for me. I moved here from the state of Maryland, and in Montgomery County, Maryland, where I lived in Silver Spring, the very first house that I bought, which I bought prior to getting married, I built in what we're describing as an ADU, and did have to go through what was a relatively non-restrictive process to get that unit approved locally. That as a young homeowner who wasn't married at the time, I was able to rent that unit to a young man who otherwise would not have been able to afford that county. That Montgomery County, Maryland is relatively expensive as a place to live in that part of Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. And, and I remember that was one of the conversations with my tenant, was that it provided him an affordable place to live. And so I think that I certainly understand that aspect of the point of ADUs in towns like Needham. So thank you very much, Oscar, for sharing your perspective.
I'll say, may I make one more point? The opportunity for anyone to be able to make something work for not just the other person, but for yourself economically is a huge advantage across a huge spectrum of people. So.
Absolutely. Thank you, Oscar. Yeah, I hadn't even reflected on the fact that this topic was very relevant for me all those years ago. And I didn't even know that it was called an ADU. I think we had a different term in that community that was used for, for the same thing. But that's absolutely what it was. So thank you very much to all of you, to Daphne, Oscar, Amy, and Deb, for your perspective, this really, really great details and information that you've shared with us, and just an opportunity for others in the community to learn more about ADUs and the value that they may bring to our local community. I also want to thank everybody for watching today. Thank you so much for joining Moving Forward Together with Equal Justice in Needham. It's a pleasure to have been with you. It's a pleasure to have talked with our panelists today. And we hope that you'll take a little time, just 5 minutes or less, to take the poll that we'll have available for you with today's show. So please let us know what you think about ADUs as affordable rental opportunities that can both benefit the owner as well as the folks who are living in these dwellings. So please give us a little bit of your time to tell us what you think and to tell us what you think about our show. We look forward to your ideas. Feel free to stay in touch with us and do watch again. So thank you again, everybody. And we're signing off for today. See you next time. Thank you.